tirs.
Des explosifs, des missiles.
Commandant minutieusement mis en scène.
J'en tirais l'attention. Urgence artificielle. Des méga-feux comme en Giron.
Bienvenue à la...
And welcome to the Abbey Udam for the second day of our World Peace Forum. And we're still with you. Frédéric Bedos is with me, and she founded the Projet Imagé. A round of applause for her. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, everyone. It's a privilege and an honor to collaborate with him. He is the Vice President of the Normandy region. He's in charge of the European and international affairs. Let's give a round of applause for Francois-Xavier Priolo.
Alors, je vous rappelle que notre...
And I remind you that our forum is broadcast live on our website, normandypourlapaix.fr, on YouTube. Please use it and watch it again, and use our hashtag NPP2024. And see behind us, you have a statue of the Braves, the courage of the Braves, and of Anne-Laure Banon, which it really makes sense because of the brave people who died on Omaha Beach, and that's where we celebrated the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And yesterday we had an amazing first day. Thousands of you attended these meetings and these debates and all the youth workshops. And let's look at a few pictures and videos.
On a vécu
We've experienced some amazing moments together. Yesterday we have the plenary sessions, the debates, the Village pour la Paix, the Peace Village, and we're trying to map the different types of violence and the feeling of powerlessness. And we also saw that the world is drifting away from us and slipping through our fingers, and we're not going to stop here. So the question is now how we can regain control of the world during these violent times. And it's important to be able to regain control of the world, and this is today's topic. And in order to answer this question, we have someone who's the member of the science committee. She's specialized in topics on international security. She's a vice president of the Jacques Delors Institute. Please welcome Nicole Guinness-Soto. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I would like to start by repeating what I already said. It's pretty much a privilege of the old-timers. Let me start with a joke I did last year during this World Peace Forum. And what's the difference between someone pessimistic and someone optimistic? Because this morning we want to be powerful, we want to regain control of the world. So it's a joke in are from the Soviet Union. So 2 people are walking in a public garden. We have someone who's optimistic and another one who is pessimistic. And everything's bad and everything's going wrong. It's getting worse. We can't do anything worse. And the optimistic man says, yeah, we can always do worse than what we have now. That was a Soviet joke.
J'aime bien cette histoire.
I really like this joke personally. Okay, let me go back to the main topic. So we saw yesterday how the archipelago of violence in the world has increased during the last decade. And we all get the feeling that things are going to get even worse. It's kind of the fate of the world that crisis would worsen. And when you look from the geopolitical point of view, when you look at Ukraine, when you see the risks now in the Middle East, and most notably in Lebanon and maybe with Iran, we get the feeling that the worst could happen. And when you look at the consequences of climate change, we understand that the year 2024 was the hottest and the most perilous year, because we have, for example, we recorded 50 degrees in Pakistan, but also in a small village in Sweden. When you look at the economy and our prosperity, we get the feeling that the future is bleak and the expected growth is approximately 1%, and the inequalities are increasing all around the world. And Oxfam gave some figures and published a report on the inequalities that were used by most decision makers at Davos. 1% of the world population owns, in 2023, 2/3 of the global wealth produced by the world in general. When you look at the expenses for the development in the world and for defense in the world, we have approximately 100 billion euros for the development and 1,000 billion euros for defense. And when you look farther down the road, we should be worried about AI. We don't know what's going to happen about the freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and even on the shorter term, we should be completely worried. When you look at the upcoming elections in the United States, because we have Kamala Harris and we have Donald Trump, one of them will get elected. So we and you are, as youth, we are now in a system where we build worries and concerns. And I'll try to tackle this idea that it's our fate. And this is why I wanted to write this short book we'll talk about a bit later on. So many questions. And this is why we wanted to have the second plenary session, to more oriented to action, and to try to regain control of the world, control of our future. And the many speakers during this plenary session will try to give us the necessary keys to avoid the worst consequences. So first of all, I would like to be humble, because it's important to be humble and modest in France nowadays, but we need to put these worries and concerns in context, because we are worried as Westerners. When you look at the rest of the planet, we have 7 billion inhabitants, because in the Western countries we are approximately 1 billion inhabitants. But they don't share our worries. Let's not forget this. For them, globalization, the new world, is not always good news, but it's an opportunity to guarantee the livelihoods. And the United Nations consider that during the first 2 decades of globalization, more than 800 million people managed to get a better livelihood and get out of poverty. And we tend to think that the world is not okay, but our world is not okay, because we tend to forget that for the rest of the planet, globalization is a big opportunity. And let's not forget this. It's a nuance I wanted to bring to this debate and this conference, because we tend to be obsessed by our Western oriented vision, and we're trying to narrow it down. We don't even represent 10% of the world population, but we still rule the planet, which is in itself is not a bad thing. But I think it was important to nuance my point of view. I wanted you to understand and why we get the feeling that things are getting worse. We had the COVID pandemic, we had the war in Ukraine, and the terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel, and now we have the reprisals by Israel, and we know that what's happening in Lebanon is terrible. We don't know what China will do in Taiwan. And we get the feeling that the future is bleak and sinister. Why? Because maybe you don't realize this, but we're almost lucky of being alive now, because we see the end of a world. We are currently experiencing a transition. It's going to take 10, 15, 20 years maybe, but everyone, the whole system we created and established after the end of the World War II, created by the Westerners for the Westerners, where we were the only one to dominate the economy and the strategy for the world. This system is not disappearing, but is getting more and more fragile. It was based on 3 main pillars: the liberal and the market economy, political democracy, and the strategic superiority of the United States. But these 3 pillars there was importance. They are now fractured. At the same time, the market economy is being challenged by the new protectionism, mostly in the United States. And Donald Trump was the first one in 2016 say that the opening the markets to the Chinese products was a bad idea. So once again, protectionism is now a possibility. We see a fracture in old democracies. You see that populism is rising and the far right is rising. And maybe in the United States after the elections, and finally the American supremacy is challenged even more. They can no longer go to war by themselves, but they need to be cautious with the new Chinese army. So we're facing a very historic moment. And I would say you, the young generations, you are lucky to see the world changing in front of your eyes. We're not always aware of this, but you will be the generation who has seen the many changes in the world. And I think it's thrilling, to be honest, because we can change the rules. And the conclusion of my first point is, since we used to be to reign on this world, the international crisis is obviously a crisis of the Western world. The Western countries are feeling this anxiety, and each and every one of us is pretty much the demonstration of this general overall anxiety in the West. And I still have 5 minutes to go, but I'll try to stick to these 5 minutes. How we can regain control. And I'll try to give you 3 main options to coordinate the many speakers we'll listen to this morning, and to open new path, new ideas to be have the will to be conscious. So I think it's in order to regain control, we have to choose between two or three dilemmas. The first dilemma is will determine the future of the global system is just one sentence. Is it we first or everyone together? Whether we decide to defend ourselves first or we decide to create something together, the world will be completely different. And when we look now at how the strategies of the countries unfold, and you see that in the Western countries we hesitate. We want to preserve at all costs our sovereignty and supremacy. And I would say the monopoly of power of these Western countries, the supremacy of democracy, and the adjustments, but real adjustment to the new world. And we see that the Western countries, they're not really sure, they hesitate. We want to get our power back like we had in 1949, pretty much like the United States. They want to remain the leaders. Or together we need to adapt. And we can see this in Europe, even though we can't see much. We don't see clearly what's happening in Europe. But we hope that last year, when we have the next mandate starting in 2025, when we look at the non-Western countries, we see pretty much the same dots. Some of them want to find their place in this system because they consider themselves to be entitled. And I think that many countries in the global south are right to demand their rightful place in because they're allowed to do so because of their economic or demographic importance. Or other countries would like to shatter the systems and destroy pretty much everything and throw this into oblivion. And we have two options. For example, Putin and Russia chose the second option. They want to destroy the current system. India and Brazil would like to become members of this system. They want to be more important in international organizations. And China, we don't really know, and we don't know which option China will choose. They may choose to adapt, they may choose to subvert the system, but we see that the superpowers, there is a dilemma, and it's a dilemma that will determine the future of international relations. Is it we first, we as Europeans, Americans, Russians, or everyone together? And together, let's try to do something to make for a brighter future. The second point.
Mon texte, alors je suis un peu perdue. Voilà. Le deuxième point sur le.
The second point. If we can regain some kind of control on the world, is to see that in the international politics can aim at the best option or only to aim at what's acceptable. I would like to quote Raymond Aron, and he said, in politics, the choice is not between what's wrong and what's right, but between what's preferable and what's despicable. And it's a true dilemma for us in the Western countries. We choose what's the best for us. Defending democracy in Ukraine, defending Ukraine, promoting democracy in the global south, in the Middle East, and even in China. Or do we choose to, let's say, to aim at something that will be less ambitious, but more realistic? I'll just give you a very short example. The distribution of inequalities in the world. So we try to do the best and what we consider to be the best. Do we trust the markets and free competition, or so we make sure that the market can create so much wealth that the distribution of wealth will be done pretty much naturally. This is, I would say, this liberal and democratic ideology that's the best for us? Or do we choose a different approach, something that may be more acceptable? It means to have a free, a true policy to distribute the wealth. And I'm in favor of having a specific tax for the very wealthy individuals and very wealthy companies. It would be interesting to have this and should be implemented. OECD and the G20 said we should tax by 30% all the revenues of the biggest companies. And you see there's a choice between what's best based on our liberal ideology or something that is just acceptable for the whole planet. And just let me quote John Fitzgerald Kennedy in 1961. And I think the sentence is truly honest and quite cynical. If the free society cannot improve the fate of most of the poorest people, it will not save the minority of the wealthiest. And it summarized pretty much well what I wanted to say. It's a big challenge for the whole capitalistic system. I consider capitalism to be amazing because it integrated very well the climate change, and now they earn money because of CSR, corporate social responsibility. They earn money thanks to sustainable development, sustainable production. They manage to use climate change to make profits. He hasn't integrated yet these social inequalities to earn money.
D'autres exemples,
I have more examples, and unfortunately I won't have much time to talk about the third dilemma because we have a round table waiting for us. And to conclude,
en revenant à à vous, les jeunes.
So once again, I'm talking to you, the youth in the audience. Of course, you're feeling anxiety, but extremely lucky to live in times where you got rules, we got rid of rules, and you can do whenever you want, and the right of force usually replace the rules, and you'll be the one to rebuild. And I live in a very, very great times. I didn't face unemployment, and my generation was blessed. And we leave you in a very anxiety-inducing world. And I consider that our generation didn't meet the targets. We couldn't improve the future of our societies. But you are lucky enough to be the one to rebuild. And the conclusion is advocacy for politics in noble meaning of the terms. And
La nécessité de combattre.
The fact that you need to refuse to submit, the necessity to keep on fighting, and I would like to encourage you. And I would like to quote Hannah Arendt, and maybe it will help you to consider politics in the most noble sense of this world.
Sur ce qu'elle appelle l'amour mundi, l'amour du monde.
It forged the concept of amor mundi, the love for the world. We should worry more about the world we existed before us and we still exist after we've disappeared. To care about this world more than about us and more about our own personal lives. Thank you, Nicole. You're amazing. And now we have this plenary and we have two roundtables. The first one will start in a few seconds and we'll talk about sharing. Sharing the vision, the world, and share our wealth and share power. The second roundtable will be about the measures to avoid chaos. How can we understand the global world? For our first panel, we would like to welcome the president of the Institute, the French Institute for International Relations, is Thierry de Montbrial.
Avec Jean-Pierre Raffarin,
and with Jean-Pierre Raffarin, she founded the foundation called Leaders for Peace, and she's the executive director, and she created this University for Peace. Please welcome Donia Kawash. Henry lives in Paris and in New York, and Guy Sormand is with us today. He studies the distribution of wealth. He was the envoy of the United Nations in Africa. And let's welcome Jean-Luc Stallon.
So on this round table, around the issue of sharing, we have seen in the introduction by Nicole Nisotto, this Western world that is leading the world's affairs ever since the last 500 years needs to finally start sharing power and resources with the others. I'll start with you, Thierry de Montbrial. Last weekend, just before you flew off to New York for the General Assembly of UN, President Macron spoke in a conference, and he called speaking for a new international world order because he thinks that the actual one is incomplete and unfair. Regarding Europe, he declared that we had to be sufficiently imaginative to think about the peace of tomorrow, a peace in Europe under a new form. So you are on the you follow Kissinger doctrine. Can you build peace with leaders that have completely different visions? When we're thinking about Russia, for instance.
Eh ben, si ça marche, c'est déjà une bonne nouvelle.
So that's already good news. We can be optimistic. I would just like to get back on the joke that Nicole was telling earlier. In the 1930s, there were a journalist, and there was Jacques Bainville. He was a famous journalist and historian. He wrote a history of France that is still being taught, and one day he was doing a conference in which he explains that everything is catastrophic. Back then, it was not. He was not mistaken. The situation was quite dire, and somebody rose left his hands. Oh, master, you are right, and since you're right, everything is bad. And Bainville says, you didn't understand. Everything was always bad, and it's deeply true. It depends on the way you look at things. And my second remark is there's always a phases you go into. You leave a phase and then you enter a new phase. The entire world history is like this. Where is the tilting point in the new world in which we are? It is the fall of the Soviet Empire. So the turn 1989, 1991. That's the end of the old world, which is not unrelated with the information technology revolution that we call the digital information. That is really the tilting point, opening up the new era. And if you have a sense of history, all the developments that turned afterwards could be with the fall of the USSR, we have reactivated issues that had been suspended since the First World War. Look at, then we have the war in Europe, but the first war in Europe, it's not this one. It was the Yugoslav war in Yugoslavia in the 1990s. That was an absolutely horrendous war. We need to remember that. This is not the first time war has returned to Europe after World War II. Regarding Kissinger, I do not believe, contrary to what the French president thinks, who's had the luck to discover international relations as being a president, which is not everyone's case. I don't think there's been big innovations or things that are going to shake up the situation. War and peace, this is a dialectic that's always existed and will always exist, simply because it's linked to the most fundamental human nature, which is good and bad. We can't do anything against that. It will continue, and even in periods of peace, like the Cold War, like Nicole just reminded us of, there was already many wars elsewhere. Maybe you didn't even mention it, but there was many wars happening during the Cold War. There was very hot wars going on elsewhere. We were at peace during that time, but elsewhere there were wars going on. Now, the issue that you are raising in international relations, it's with your enemies that you need to discuss and find compromises. It's not with your friends. I know, of course, that with friends it's not always easy, but in the issues of war and peace, you make peace with your enemies, not with your friends. But and how do you establish peace? I think what was innovating since the beginning of the 19th century is this notion of collective security. This collective security started with the Vienna Congress in 1815, where the idea was to agree on the conditions, on the global conditions of a balance that would ensure a certain peace in Europe, at least for a certain point. It's actually the starting point of the Kissinger doctrine, this Vienna Congress in 1815. And why did the Cold War not degenerate? Then there was all debate about the nuclear bomb. I'm not going to insist on that, but there was these efforts made, very remarkable efforts, regarding collective security. I think that some of you know that in 1962, there was a major event. There was the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we were 2 steps away from a world war. And then this led to the developments between the United States and the USSR, the arms control, meaning that we had control arms negotiating, a series of extraordinary negotiations. Sadly, this entire system was destroyed. We destroyed the entire system that was very innovating on negotiation around weapons and weapons control, etc. And I'm going to finish with this. What should we do today? At the beginning of the war in Ukraine, there was it was not a question of everything or nothing. It was not all the responsibilities on one hand and the other, and the culprits on the other. It's even who started the fight, who started, and the kids say you started, no, you started it. You need to recognize the complexity of these conflicts. But many were saying, including our Minister of Finances, Bruno Le Maire, he said we need to destroy the economy of the USSR. That was a naive approach. Then I think the time will come, and I hope that we're getting closer to it, where we'll have to work out compromises. And the new system will need to inspire itself of the method of the Vienna Congress and the famous Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe in Helsinki in 1975, so that there is a balance, not a balance of terror, but a balance of interests. In a negotiation, you need to understand what are the fundamental interests of the opposing party. Whether you like them or not, that is the question, and you need to go towards this. And this is my last remark, but that will take lots and lots of time. Thank you, Thierry de Montbrial from the Institute for Foreign Relations. Nicole, you wanted to mention something? Yes, just wanted to say I absolutely agree with this, that this praise of complexity that Thierry Montbrial mentioned, that it's very difficult to manage complexity in a certain way. It's complex. Complexity is a complex issue, but it's one of the issues we have in our democracies is that we live on the emotional plane rather than on the reasonable plane. When we look at, particularly at the beginning, the way that we treated the war in Ukraine, or even today, we treat conflicts between Israel and Palestine, we see that the emotional aspect, so this say that you stand on the side of the victims, that you feel that there's a fight between the good and the evil, and stops this approach, this complex approach of getting out of these wars and create pathways not towards peace, but a stabilization of, I think this dictatorship of emotion is one of the big weaknesses of our democracies, and sometimes prevents us from thinking.
Toujours applaudir Nicole Niusoto, ça c'est c'est un must.
So, if Thierry Montbrial is a friend of the Kissinger doctrine, Guy Sormand, he is an optimist by strategy. What we are missing today, according to you, are spaces of dialogue. It's the sharing of knowledge, among others, that you defend. Can you explain to us what you mean by that? Yes. I do not disagree completely with what has been said up until now. I just wanted to, based on what has been said, to see how we can progress. What I find interesting in the actual world and in the conflicts that are underway, it's the ignorance, and the ignorance of the other. We do not know, and we don't want to know what really the Russians want. Have we made the effort to understand? We have a certain blocking because of absolutely barbaric and inhuman behaviors, so we can't think beyond that and wonder if maybe there are reasons, motives, emotions that are not necessarily understood by ourselves. So there is a lack of knowing the other, and maybe not even doing the effort to try to understand or better know the other. There's another example. We live in a constant fear. I don't know if it's an overblown fear, but we live in the fear of an aggression by China, as if it was inevitable that there'd be a war between the West and China. Why is it why should it be inevitable? Have we really made the effort to understand what China truly desires, what the Chinese truly desire? We have not made this effort. I think many conflicts, I mean, slightly excessive to say that conflicts are born out of misunderstandings, but I think conflicts are maintained and worsened by the emotional aspect, but also by the ignorance. And we are in a period where it's easy to be informed, but actually no one is informed anymore. Be it starting from the school, there is a deficit in knowledge in the school system, and this is being maintained by the media and by the social networks. And the optimism I try to witness here is, I think, an effort of a better understanding of the other, trying to share. This is the topic of trying to understand what the other wants, would not avoid the conflict, but probably reduce the risks of that conflict. So for me, the optimism goes via the knowledge. Optimism is based on knowledge. And just to take an example, the war is absolutely inevitable and peace is possible. You need to say it here in Caen. You were talking about the luck of the generation. We belong, you and I, and Thierry, to a first generation of a history of France that has not fought a war against Germany. So it's possible. So it's possible by this effort of knowing, getting to know each other. That's why I'm optimistic. Okay, try to maybe close this gap of knowledge. That's one of the missions we have here with this forum, particularly concerning the young. There's over 1,000 young people in this room that came with their teachers. And we can also give a hand to the teachers, because they have a very important role to play. Today's topic is the sharing the vision we need to discuss with people we don't agree. The aim is to and there's also an education.
Je vais me tourner vers Donia Kawash. Donia Kawash, donc vous avez cofondé l'ONG Leader pour la paix avec Jean.
You have created the NGO Leaders for Peace, which, together with Jean-Pierre Raffarin, former French Prime Minister, to distribute the culture of peace and the emerging worlds by investing massively. You've created a mobile school for peace for the future elites in the countries where we need this culture for peace. My question is twofold. What form should this education to peace take? And does it also go via an education to sharing, this capacity of listening to the other? Thank you, Francois-Xavier. Thank you, Frédéric. I'm very happy to be here with people who believe and practice peace. First of all, we haven't got the choice to sharing. Sharing is already beginning to share to peace, because as John Donne was saying, no man is an island, no nation is an island, as regardless of how strong it is. What we have chosen with our Leaders for Peace, we need to really tackle the roots of the violence. And among these roots of violence, of course, there is the bad governance. If we've chosen the path of education to reestablish it, first thing is that our humanity has never had so many tools to build peace and fight against the causes of violence, technological, scientific progresses, medical progress. But paradoxically, we never had so many conflicts since 1946, and we actually live in a world where we even talk about the return of the nuclear war, and the weapons are more and more sophisticated. The second thing, the sophistication of these weapons and the military power are not sufficient enough to prevent or to win conflicts. We've seen it with the US, who have been able to pacify a country like Afghanistan, where 0.1% of their GDP. And what's motivated really the building of these schools for peace is that there's a very strong correlation between bad governance, the normative deficit, and the conflictuality. So if you haven't got a strong institutional framework, you cannot negotiate because you know who to negotiate with. You can inject in these countries as much as development aid as you want. It's not going to work out. So it's really completely a failure to think that you can build peace without building this normative and institutional framework. That is exactly what we're doing within Leaders for Peace. We are training young leaders. We're shaping up young leaders in emerging countries. We share academic excellence because we think that it's via knowledge, by allowing access to this academic excellence in these emerging countries, that we'll be able to rebuild elites behind the decision of going to war. There's also political decisions, so it's all the intelligence of the political deciders. Sometimes we need to create this deciding, particularly in these post-colonial countries where there's dictatorships that have completely locked down the academic system, in all the places where we can create new elites that will think and act on the future. So, Donia Kawash, you've just quickly mentioned Afghanistan. In order to continue on this topic of sharing, now I'm looking to you, Jean-Luc Stallon, and we can wonder what happened in Afghanistan. 20 years of American presence, billions of dollars spent, but nothing in education. And today we're back to 2.0 as a responsible of the UNDP in Central Africa. You are very well placed to know how much, lots of money is being used on the continent. But we remain on our topics between sharing and the spoliation. Isn't the first issue corruption and bad governance? I'm very happy to be here. I find this forum of a very high level, and since yesterday I was very impressed by the debate, so thank you for having invited me. I would like to answer this question by going back on the topic, how can we take control of the world again? Since we're talking about Africa, I really want to place this on how Africa is slowly taking back control of its own development, because development aid, the classical development aid, that is the one coming from rich countries towards developing countries. This aid is declining, and it's continuing to decline. For about 10 years, we see what we call the ODA, Overseas Development Assistance. So this is going to diminish more and more. It's been said the advanced economically advanced countries have a 1% growth. They're not going to put money into development. So for Africa today is to create their own fiscal space, to generate their own resources to finance their development. And to illustrate this, I'm going to put this on two axes. The first one is the reforms that you need to lead for these African countries to be able to build up their own development infrastructures and fiscal spaces. You need to know that today in Africa, just to give you a certain number of figures, the fiscality regarding the GDP, it's about 15%. We in the advanced countries, we are at 45-50%. So there's still a big space upwards. So if with reforms, African countries can better optimize their fiscality, they can create this fiscal space. The resources exist, and they do not necessarily need to come from elsewhere. They exist locally, but you need to manage them properly. The second axis to create these fiscal spaces is the transformation of the economy, and that is really a topic that is very dear to my heart. We need to pull Africa out. Africa needs to pull itself out of these extractive economies, these exploitative economies where there is no added value generated. We need to transform the economy, provide added value. I'm absolutely against people who think that Africa should jump over the industrialization sector. Africa needs to create an industrial base, needs to use its natural resources to create value, to create jobs locally, and to generate resources and finance its own development. So regarding governance, I would look at this from the social contract aspect. There's many young people here listening to us. You need to know that in Africa, 70% of the population in Africa is under 35 years old. So these young people, what they need today, what they aspire to, and they know what's going on in the world. The young people, they're connected, they have access to social networks, and they have access to all types of information. They know what's going on in the world. And the young Africans, just young people around the world, they also want to live well. They want to have an improvement of their quality of life. And if we do not resolve the job issue, the employment issue, the training for young people in Africa, then it's clearly this is going to be a ticking time bomb in the future. And since in this forum we talk about the new one, this is going to be a new source of violence if we do not address that issue. Just to say that in reality, beyond the democracy issues and beyond the issues of good governance, what is very important, what you need to think about is the social contract. We need a new social contract in order to respond to the aspirations of the African people. And this needs to be based on a very simple thing. We need to liberate development in these. In many countries, we see more and more the unhappiness, the unrest and stuff. Take the example of Kenya. In Kenya, there was election. Things went well. A government was elected, a president was elected, but the young people rioted in the street. The Z generation. Why did they riot? Because they're unhappy, because their welfare, their life is not improving, their quality of life is not improving. So you need a new social contract in order to be able to improve the conditions of life of the population. Thank you, Jean-Luc Stallon. I think that will probably get back to you during this forum on this new social contract. Nicole de Soto wanted to react to this. Yes, just some quick comments for Guy Sormand. Of course, we need to understand the other and listen to the other. The issue is that we are in this is not a scientific matter. This is not a scientific debate. Maybe the other doesn't know what he wants. If we ask the Europeans today, what is your visions of the future? What are the interests you want to defend? There would be probably no response. The difficulty is not simply to listen, is to understand, to understand beyond the official speeches what really could be common between the other and us. It's not so much what they want, but what is common between us and them. That could be the first step towards on the road. And with Russia, it's what we should do, indeed. If we want to finish this war in Ukraine. But where I agree with you is that, as my mother said, curiosity is really a virtue. You need to just go towards the other to know him better. To what Donia said, yes, indeed. I think you really have described very well the conditions of a pathway to peace. But the issue of the institution and of the norms is who writes these norms, who builds this institution. Today we are in a system where our norms are Western norms. The Chinese are trying to produce Chinese norms, particularly in terms of commerce, of environment. And I'm not saying that we should adopt the Chinese norms because they're easier, they are less demanding. But nevertheless, there's an issue of who writes these norms, and can we write them together? And this is not happening anywhere. And I think that, for instance, for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, there is no way of getting out of this conflict if we remain on a solution that is being imposed or negotiated only by the United States and Israel. I think there is no solution in this conflict if we do not have a conference, a global conference, where all the actors of the Middle East are coming together, maybe Russia and China. So we need to have a the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a worldwide issue, so there needs to be a global response to that. And this would, we need to discuss, to envision this. And for Jean-Luc, I have one question. Because the European Union, as an international actor, when they want to be an international actor, very often they have announced a priority for Africa. And the relationship of the EU and Africa is a completely contractual relation that the Union has done with the African countries on the terms of trade, fight against terrorism, human rights, etc. Are you expecting anything from this European framework with Africa to develop a more democratic governance, to improve the employment of youth, or do you think that all these are just empty words? Okay. Guy Sormand wanted to add a comment, and then Jean-Luc Solomon is going to answer Nicole's question. Yeah, it's good. We want to have an interactive discussion. Very quickly, I wanted to go so fast and quickly that I forgot the two most fundamental aspects for me in what I call the sharing of knowledge. The first aspect is the fact that it's to know yourselves. What does this mean concretely? We have in France, and in teaching, we have a very positive vision of colonization. We think that we actually brought civilization to half of the world. And since we do not know ourselves, we don't understand why suddenly the French are being kicked out of Africa. With a hatred in countries like Senegal, it's completely unexpected, or in Burkina Faso, which we could not even envision because we completely ignore our own history because we haven't shared it with the victims of colonization. So the sharing of knowledge implies a reflection on yourself and rewriting the history from the standpoint of those who have been impacted and victims of colonization. We are surrounded by people who are not our friends. We need to ask ourselves why they do not like us. All these people have been colonized, first thing. And the second thing is to share. Who do we share knowledge with? You say it's very difficult. People do not know what they want. Maybe we're not listening to the right people. We are in a system that is the international system, where the heads of state speak with the head of state. Is a head of state representative of its own nation, and not always? And I would finish on an anecdote. The Arab Spring in 2011, if I remember well. If you remember 2011, some of you remember this. Tunisia kicked Ben Ali out, and they were followed by Egypt and almost all countries in the Arab world. The French diplomacy was completely taken aback, and Alain Juppé, Minister of Foreign Affairs, he organized a conference at the Institute of the Arab World where he invited Arab dissidents, these are Democrats, from all the Arab countries. The ambassadors in all the French countries, they were unable to find one of these Democrats that could express what the Arab street wanted. And so when I say no sharing the knowledge, you also need to listen to the right people. When the heads of state speak with the heads of state, that's their job. That belongs to them. The academics, the researchers, the artists, the writers, to listen to other voices than that on the head of the states, who are their own worry is to continue to hold on to power. Sharing the knowledge, I would like to insist on this. We need to know ourselves, each other, as the philosopher says, and we need to know the others, but all the others, not just their institutional spokesperson.
Merci Guy Saumon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saumon. Thierry Montbéliard, you wanted to say something, and then Jean-Luc Salon will answer the questions asked. I would like to comment on what Nicole Niesoto said about Russia, because we don't really know what they want. Well, another word on the conflict in Israel and Palestine, because it's a conflict between Israel and Palestine, and it clearly highlights how complex things are. On the first point, let me tell you, I'm someone who knows Russia quite well, and most notably in the 90s. And during the 90s, I traveled through Russia, and I managed to meet quite a lot of people, including the high-level politicians and people, and I think they know what they want, is to guarantee the security at the borders. Russia, after the end of the Soviet Union, Russia almost completely collapsed. You need to remember that during the 90s, Russians considered Russia and the Federation of Russia collapsing and pretty much having only Moscow to be still robust enough. And it's the truth. They saw that other countries, like for example, like Ukraine, and a big diaspora, and they wanted to develop this nationalistic movement. It's not only Ukraine is not only Ukrainians; it's more than this. And so the question of security of their borders, the same thing for Georgia. And think what the Russians want when they announced way before the speech of Putin in München in 2007, and I noted that in the middle of the 90s, they want to have a new security system. And after that, Putin made mistakes. We can talk hours about this, but this is I wanted to highlight. Moving on to the Israel and Palestine conflict, and I think that, and most notably for all of you, the youth, and we don't see it very well because of the spotlights, but unfortunately that's how it is. It's a clear example of a conflict which is for now insolvable. Why? Because on one side you have those who want to destroy Israel, and on the other side the Israelis who just want to apply an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. Let's go back to the Bible so we understand this law. So it's insolvable because we don't have the necessary will, the minimum will to start negotiations to solve these issues. And we have double revendication on the territory called Palestine. And we see that now the United States want to bring Israel to be more moderate, but they don't want to hear anything. And they could actually cut the weapon exports. So,
Pire que ça.
So it's insolvable, and worse than this, because all the people, all the casualties, now people who were killed on the 7th of October on one side, and all the Palestinians who got killed since then. Well, the families, the death, it would generate hatred, and hatred will be conveyed to the next generations. And this idea that, and I completely agree with this, the idea that we need to get to know yourself. It's important to understand the territory and what's happening on the ground, and not only what's written in books. And we need to acknowledge that we cannot find a solution for this as a way to prevent a conflict with China, with Taiwan, but we need to acknowledge that for now they're insolvable.
Formidable. Alors, on voit que entre la...
Amazing. So we see that we need to find a solution, and in order to distribute wealth, we need to find a modus operandi, and we need to have the necessary tools. Jean-Luc Stallon, you wrote a book called The Growth of the Elite, and you created an index to measure inequalities. Let me answer to Nicole's question. Previously, when I mentioned the efforts that need to be made by Africans to create their tax systems, obviously we still need the help of the superpowers, but when we look at how high the needs are, how important it is to invest in education, in health, in infrastructure, how to tackle climate change, because Africa is a victim of climate change. Africa doesn't contribute much to CO2 emissions, but unfortunately, they're in the front line of this climate change. And when you look at the importance of the needs there, and because you see it's not going to be enough, so we need to focus on reforms. We can make sure that the Africans can actually start their own changes. Two figures for the help for development. We look at the fight against terrorism, because we know that many regions in Africa are suffering from terrorism, because the Sahelian region, but also the countries surrounding the Chad Lake. If you look at the amounts invested in these countries to tackle terrorism and the jihadi movements, is next to nothing compared to the needs. And regarding climate change, we talked about $100 billion so they could tackle climate change, but we are now reached $1,000 billion needed, but they still haven't received the $100 billion. Now, moving on to my book. First of all, I'm happy to be able to talk about this book. It all started about the inequalities, and everyone's talking about these inequalities. We try to have a comprehensive debate, and we mentioned that 1% of the wealthiest individuals captured 2/3 of the overall wealth. The asset inequalities, we consider that 1% of the biggest farms have more than 50 hectares and represent 70% of arable earth in soils. It means that the rest of the population need to share these arable soils. And if we look at taxes, we have more than $500 billion of what we call tax evasion. So we consider that $500 billion is more than the GDP of Nigeria, which is the wealthiest country in Africa. So I want you to challenge these inequalities. And so I try to measure these inequalities. Well, I wanted to understand where the inequalities came from. which system led to these inequalities. So I wanted to assess the combinations of factors. All the elites try to capture and grab this in wealth. And I wanted to understand the many factors behind these inequalities. And now that decided to draft a new concept, which is called the elitist growth, the behavior of the elites so they can capture wealth. So we shouldn't consider the elitist growth to be the growth of the elites, but how elites actually capture wealth. And how can we assess this? Can we understand the importance of this in Africa and outside of Africa? So I decided to create this index, and I'll start from simple things. You started in the 90s, and we stopped thinking that inequalities were based on revenue. Mabul Ulhaq and Amartya Sen decided to have the Human Development Index. It goes way beyond revenues because it also included another index based on education and health.
Je pense qu'il faut aller au-delà du...
In the 21st century, we should go beyond this HDI. We need to talk about governance, because when you are in a system when you cannot talk, when the public funds are not managed in a transparent way, this is what I wanted to consider and integrate in my index. And we need to consider the environment, because in rich countries we think about CO2 emissions, but in poorest countries it's about deforestation, for example. Thank you very much, Mr. Stallon, for this index of elitist growth in order to tackle inequalities. Let's go back to Donia Kawash. We talk about sharing wealth in the world, sharing power, sharing wealth, and let's go back we always go back to governance, and leaders for peace work on for this question, this principle, this concept of governance, and we shouldn't expect states to give us what we need, so we need to count on private stakeholders, on companies. What do you expect from companies? Let me go back to answer to Guy, because he's leaving, but anyway, let me go back to the Arab Spring and the French embassies. We couldn't find anyone to talk to, and I experienced the Arab Spring in Tunisia, and we don't have democrats. The worst thing that dictatorships do, they kill the public life. Because Ben Ali left the country, we no longer have elites, we have Islamists and terrorist groups pretty much everywhere in the country. And what happened in our country, the fact that all the elites have left, we've lost 15 years, and what happened in Tunisia is pretty much going to happen everywhere in Africa. What's going to happen after Bongo, after Ouattara? Well, we have a coup. After Bongo, the one exception is Senegal. It's the very first time that in Africa we have votes and transparent votes. So we need to find a third path to just, because of the lack of elites, because all the elites have left, and we need a post-colonial political systems, and this is why we have decided to create a syndicate of newcomers. We try to educate more than 3,000 young people, so we want to have this new type of governance. We decided to create a place so we can actually create and fund this, what we call a syndicat des entrants, syndicate of newcomers, of new stakeholders. Why in Africa? Because we see that we see the tilting point in Africa in growth. We have more birth in Nigeria than in the EU. So we don't have a local alternative. It will not be possible to stop migration by having quotas and by populism. And thirdly, Jean-Luc, you reminded us that there's a challenge with climate change, and we know that Africa doesn't receive enough funds to tackle climate change, and the population is expected to be multiplied by 2. And we see that the agricultural profitability plummeted by 25%. Because why? Because we don't have leaders who are good enough to anticipate the future, because we're talking about the debt of Africa, approximately around 8,000 billion euros. And previously it was International Monetary Fund, and now it's China and Russia. So you see the transfer of power. Is it important to have strong African sovereignty, or subcontracted to Africa, to America, to Russia, and see what happened in Venezuela, in other countries, and at the same time Africa represents 65% of arable soils that are not cultivated on the planet. But Africa has no reason to remain poor. But the reason why is that they don't have the political leaders, so they can actually create the future. So we need to invest in this third path to move away from the status quo, because the African youth no longer accept to have like a president elected for the next 35 years, and we need to find another alternative. We don't want coup. For example, Tunisians, they regret that Ben Ali have left. It couldn't be more ambitious, create a third way. So we abolished polygamy in the 50s and gave the right to vote to women in the 60s, and allows abortion. So we need to find another way, the third way, and this is why we need to invest massively in education for the new leaders. Thank you very much, Donia Kawash.
Et merci à l'ensemble de...
And I would like to thank Donia Kawash, and I would like to thank all the panelists on sharing. Thank you. It's truly fascinating, and we really right in the core of this topic, and we see that. Once again, thank you very much for this first roundtable.
Vous allez pouvoir regagner le public. Je vais demander à Nicole. Alors avant d'enchaîner sur notre...
So before we move on to the second roundtable during this morning session, we suggested a few good reads with a book written by Bertrand Madi, and another suggestion in a few minutes, right in line with what we just discussed. We could have called this roundtable To Choose the Future. As actually it was already the title of your world, 10 questions about the world and the future of the world. Why did you write this book? Well, two things that were important. The first one, that I was worried about this collapsing world, and I couldn't really understand what was going on, and I was getting seriously anxious because of this. And my 30-year-old daughter told me, I'm not sure I'll have kids in a world like this. As a potential grandmother, I was terrified. I want grandchildren. And the second thing that worried me and made me write this book, I'm fed up to be this fate we expect, this pessimism. So many people have leaders of NATO, we should get ready for high-intensity wars. This is a job of soldiers. Soldiers should get ready for war, and civilians shouldn't. And we cannot say that war is the future of our continent. We cannot do this. And now we're at the starting point of this book, and I wanted what is the source of our worries? And I chose 10 points. And I also mentioned 15 additional points in the conclusion of my book. The chaos, the future of democracy, is it dead and buried? Can we be replaced by more authoritarian regimes? What about the future of globalization? Is economic growth finished for us? So we now have a successive crisis. What's going to happen with science? Will we become objects, products for the AI scientists? Because we know that even the wealthiest countries can no longer control AI. The relations between China and the US, will this be one of the main pillars of the future of the world, or is it more complex than we think it is? I think it's important that the future of peace. Peace is the last chapter of my book, and in this bleak context, how we can preserve these ways towards peace. And it's quite a simple book. In each chapter we have some elements of context, an inventory. What do we do to tackle climate change, for example? We have a chapter on this. An inventory, the factors to consider for the future, and we have 2 or 3 different scenarios based on what we'll choose to do or not to do. Let's not spoil everything, but first of all, it's important to buy a book, and you will sign this book at the bookshop. 256 pages about the future of our world.
Alors vous le savez ou pas, mais en tout cas je vous le dis.
So you know, or maybe you don't know it, but I will tell you that during this World Peace Forum, we also have the opportunity to highlight some NGOs, some organizations, and these NGOs work on the ground in order to promote peace. So for example, Normandy, in the last few years, we created an NGO called Acted, and we are active in the Sahelin region and in all the regions. So today we wanted to highlight an association helping people in need, and most notably people with disabilities, whenever it's necessary. This association is here to meet the needs, specific needs, and by improving the livelihood and living conditions. And it was created in 1982, and the name of this association is called Handicap International. The president is here, and let's give a round of applause for Xavier Ducrest. Thank you for this silence. Thank you. We cannot see much because of the spotlights, but I have a lot of things to say, but I became very emotional because of this roundtable, because we talked about sharing. Just an amazing word, an amazing principle. And since the headquarters of Handicap International is based in Lyon, and I will quote Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, say to welcome in yourself the share of the other. And he also say that I'm not afraid, I learn from your difference. And these are 2 key ideas to tell you that today, if we want to build peace, we need to start like this. Once again, Handicap International, because we were founded in 1982, but in 1981, 3 doctors from MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, were working in one of the biggest camps near the Thai border, and we have men, women, children injured by mines, and they have to be amputated. Amputations and amputations, and see see men, women, children lying on the ground without no more future. And they said, you cannot go on like this. We need to. They went to see Doctors Without Borders, and they said, we need to get them back on track. We need to bring them a new future for them. They need to retain their dignity. And so they decided to create and to found a new association, a new NGO called Handicap International in 1982. And these three doctors had a vision, the ambition to say that we can act, we can do something, and they did something tremendous. Now, to physically to help these people so they can go back to school, they can start to be farmers again. They used pretty much everything they had: bamboo, rubber, wood, and they decided to build prosthetics for these people. And it was actually because they were great, because they was autonomous, and they became trainers. And they started to work all around the world, and the processes, the new approaches became widespread and adopted by pretty much everyone. So we had, at the beginning, we had 3 doctors in the refugee camp, and we now 5,000 employees. We're active in more than 60 countries. And we participate in more than 480 programs. And we have more than 11 million beneficiaries. Just to tell you that our action is based on 2 pillars. We work on the ground, I'll mention this briefly, and we need to conduct advocacy. We work always in urgency because there's an armed conflict, a natural disaster. We always have a very fast action teams, so we are here, so we work on logistics. We work for Oxfam, for the Red Cross. We have a unit called Atlas Logistics to help the humanitarians in their work. And we're also here to do prevention, because when we have a natural disaster, for example in Haiti, in Turkey, in Syria, in Nepal, in Morocco, we have tsunamis and hurricanes in Madagascar. We need to make sure that the population is well informed and they can be safe even before the disaster happens. So we have prevention in post-conflict countries, because we still have landmines and explosive devices. The worst country with the most landmines and explosive devices is Laos, because we have a lot of groups coming here and there. So the Americans dropped an incredible number of bombs, and the second country with the most landmines, it's Ukraine. And we're facing a terrible problem, and we need to tackle this problem at one point, and we need to make sure that we're no more landmines in Ukraine, but same in Afghanistan, Syria, even Colombia and the south of Senegal. And we also have rehab for people with disabilities, and we have devices, we have tools, we have 3D prosthesis, and because sometimes in some places it's not possible to do so. Unfortunately, it's not always possible to have workshops in specific countries, so we collect the data, we send the data abroad, and then we receive the prosthesis for this person. So we do rehabilitation, and in conflicts and in post-conflict situations, so we're here to support the countries to make sure that people can get their lives back. So we're talking about inclusivity, and we talk insertion and integration, because we have a concept of disability, and you have the concept of disability, but it's not the same thing as disability is understood in Asia, in India, in all the countries. We have beliefs, we have prejudices, We think that 15% of the population lives with a disability. It's far from the truth, because in many, many countries, it's very difficult to track invisible disabilities, and sometimes visible disability is also a shame for the whole family. So I say that it's much more than 15%. So it's important to count on integration, to work on inclusivity by work, by education, by informing the population. And I say we have many partners here in the room. It's important to create entrepreneurship. We always ready to welcome new entrepreneurs to support us. So make sure that people can develop and work by themselves. We call this localization of humanitarian help. And we also here to talk about landmines, as already mentioned. And let's talk about peace. We talk about peace. We talk a lot and very well about peace. Yesterday afternoon and this morning. We shouldn't lose it. How can we act? The number of conferences, the number of seminars I've attended, and we're full of very intelligent people, amazing concepts, the commitment of a lot of people, very brilliant people. But what happens next? Well, men, women, and children saw in Ethiopia, in Togo, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, and even in Colombia, Venezuela, in Laos and Cambodia, in Vietnam. What do we do for these people? We need to act. And as Francois-Xavier told me, try not to be too gloomy with your presentation. We're here to have hope. And we're here to be hopeful because we have the possibility to act. We are approximately 2,000 people here. And if all of us, we act now, well, we'll win. So tonight, you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, I've acted today. And what Jean Cocteau said, mirrors should reflect twice before reflecting our image. If we act now, well, we had better vision of who you are and why. Because together, Francois-Xavier, and in 1997, we were awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace. And we, moving on to the advocacy, we have enough signatures of citizens like you, like me, with a pen, and now we can do it with a smartphone. And I invite you to do it just right now. We managed to convince the governments, and we can have a treaty to ban landmines. And now, unfortunately, landmines are back, but we see a drop of 10% in the number of victims. We saved one man, one woman, one child. In 2008, we started to ban submunition mines. And we managed to have a convention against the bombing against civilians. 80 states, that's not enough. We should have twice as many states. And unfortunately, we're running out of time, so please bring out your smartphones. You have bags. It's difficult to find your smartphone in your bag, but no, it's not a macho comment. Basically, I don't have a handbag, so that's why I'm saying this. So take out your smartphone and in the search bar, hashtag ceasefire now. CEASEFIRENOW, ceasefire now. And when you type this in your search bar, you will see Handicap International, and it's great because I can see Handicap International in the search bar.
And then, yeah, I'll wait for Nicole to. I'm absolutely respectful of the age because myself, I'm not the youngest chap I used to be. So it says sign the petition on your smartphone. Here again, why am I telling you this? Ask ourselves, while you are typing this, During World War I, 15% of the victims were civilians. Second World War, 45% of the victims were civilians. Today, you're better off being in the army because 90% of the victims are civilians. It's absolutely carnage. It's a shame. We'll not be able to tell to the future generations we did not know. We know it. So we have the obligation to act in order to be not complicit with what's going on today. So have you signed the petition? Please sign the petition. Has everyone signed the petition? If you have a smartphone, is there anyone here who has not got a smartphone? Now I'm going to ask you someone. Of course, you can contribute to the Pyramid of Shoes, go the internet, Pyramid of Shoes to mobilize people, so that way you go. Understand our mission and sign the petition. We need to do pyramids of shame. And the second thing I'm going to ask you now, and with your phones, your smartphones, you'll be able to film, because this moment will be unique. I'm going to ask you to get up, those who can. And now please film it. This is a unique moment. I'm going to ask all of you together, and I'm going to say it once, and please repeat after me. Cease fire now. Cease fire now. It's louder. There you go. Together. Congratulations, you are extraordinary.
Merci, Xavier.
Thank you, Xavier, for this fantastic show of showmanship. Bring in the clowns. Let's act. This is what Xavier has just given us. You have a kind of stolen the show, but at least you know what's expecting you when you're ready. And it shows one thing, that we are more and more numerous to be aware of how important the state of the world calls us to act urgently. Yes, indeed, we're talking where we need to act urgently. And I'm sure that as fast as we can, we are going to find new ideas to influence on the destiny of the world. And we would like to give a big applause to Handicap International and his CEO. Thank you. And congratulations to all of you. To be here today and committed today, it already shows that you're interested in doing this. To take control back of the world, we need men and women of goodwill in order to build peace, but how and with what priorities? To talk about this on stage, please, the head of the Strategic Foresight Group between War and Peace, historian of the conflicts around the world, and Normandy, pas la peine de dire son nom, Antekar. He was the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Turkey. Today he's the deputy of the Turkish template, Mevlut Cavusoglu. She's Egyptian. She is the General Secretary of the NGO Regions for Peace, and she is an advisor, high-level advisor, with the General Secretary, Ms. Ata Azakaram. Researcher, academic, specialized in foreign policy. He is within the Nobel Committee charged to designate the Peace Nobel Prize. Asli Toje. She was born in Nagasaki. She's a very young but strong activist against nuclear arms. Suzuka Nakamura. And of course, Nicole. What could we do without Nicole?
Bienvenue à vous tous. On a beaucoup de nationalités.
We have many nationalities today at the round table. Norway, India, Egypt, Japan, Turkey, this is really an international forum. It's very important to not just only have the French speaking to the French. That is really one of the mandates of some Normandy fees. We're going to start this roundtable with you today, as I told you. You're a member of the Nobel Committee, who designates each year the Nobel Peace Prize winner. And on this roundtable, you told me that you were not an idealist, that you need to look at the world the way it is in reality. And you told to Frédéric, the world today is at the level of ground zero. So Alfred Nobel, when he created the Nobel Prize, two priorities. He wanted to disarm and he wanted to foster fraternity. If we look at the world today in all its ugly reality, is that not a pipe dream? Have we not kind of lost the war here?
Not. Absolutely not. The third criteria that Alfred Nobel singled out in his last will and testament that he wrote in 1896 in Paris was the joining of peace congresses, and that is what we are participating in today. This is a peace congress. I would like to say that obviously we are very proud of all the Nobel laureates, but there is a special place in my heart for the Doctors Without Borders that received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1999. I think for us as human beings, we have to recognize that humanity it's a work in progress. And we are always at the precipice of disaster, and we're always at the beginning of new great things. We must never forget that we are masters of our own faith. We are of our own faith. And I think whatever man has created, man can change. Unfortunately, as Nicole pointed out in her excellent presentation, the dynamics of international politics, the logic of the state, the logic of geopolitics is, on the basic level, can be rational and logical, seen from the perspective of the individual nation, but who will speak out for mankind? Mankind, us as a species, humans that are living on this planet that we want to share and to prosper on this one earth. And I think that the Nobel Peace Prize in many ways is a signal, an ideal for the best impulses of human nature. And I would like to underline that the message from Alfred Nobel is that the individual matters. And that goes for each one of you here in the room today. There is nobody who can ever know what individual or what action or what word will matter. But we have to cling to this hope that we are all masters of our own fate. And for each voice for war, there should be a voice for peace. And I think, yes, I do call myself a realist. I think that we should look on the world with a cold eye and recognize the challenges that we are facing in the most honest possible manner. I think we have progressed in many ways. We have avoided a third world war so far. I think that we should continue doing so. And I think that especially for the young people today, who, let's be honest, you have much more skin in the game than any of the older ones here, because you are the ones who would be called upon to sacrifice your life in endless and stupid wars. And we are in a very difficult situation now. The clouds are gathering, and war is on the horizon. And in this context, I would like to say that the message of Alfred Nobel is now speaking to a new generation. And I would like for you to focus on his key message. We need to work for disarmament. We need to work for understanding and fraternity amongst nations. And we need to get together for peace congresses. And for that, I would like to salute the organizers of this most wonderful event. Thank you.
So indeed, we need to look at the world in all its ugly reality. When you have a rational approach, there's also a spiritual approach. It happens that religion is an absolutely unavoidable factor in the international relations and power plays. For centuries, we have seen wars of religion destroying the world. Then came the Enlightenment, the rationale clarified the role between the political plane and the religious plane. But today we see a return of the religious factor. And as a Karam, I look at you, including in violent forms that take the face of radicalism or fundamentalism, even though religion is supposed to carry a message of peace. As a Karam, how do you contemplate this ambivalence?
First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and thank you to both of you for doing a remarkable job.
Je me demande si le micro fonctionne là. Pourtant, il a l'air de marcher.
Your microphone does not seem to be working.
I was just saying thank you for the opportunity to be here.
As close as you can.
As close as possible. Yeah. Okay, we'll do the Oprah Winfrey as close as possible. First of all, I think that the easiest way to answer the question is to what I call we live in an era where it is the arrogance and tyranny of ignorance that prevails. So we have much data, much facts, much whatever. We're swimming in data and facts and evidence, but we are actually remarkably uneducated to some extent. But we think this is the right way to be because we have all the information. 3 features of this. Feature number 1, 84% of the world's population adheres or professes to a particular religion or faith tradition. 84%, that's 8 out of 10 people. And yet, when you look at the mindsets of so many of our leaders and institutions around the world, they are remarkably secularly oriented. Not secular as in a bad thing, but secular as in putting religion aside thing, which is deeply problematic, and yet it has been the norm of governance and education and knowledge production for the longest possible time. So odd, that, to say the least. The second anomaly, or if you will, paradox, is that we have when we decide to reflect, we still have, as you said, a very Enlightenment-centric form of thinking. There are many good things about Enlightenment thinking, don't get me wrong. But one problematic part of Enlightenment thinking is binarisms. Good, bad, emotion, reason, black, white. And we all know that the world isn't quite as clear-cut as that. Our lives, our ways of thinking are not quite as clear-cut as that. So therefore, when you come to religion, we see religion as either good or bad. And we end up not quite understanding the paradoxes of the religious, which make our secular world look really rather sad. Do you know that 60% of basic health care around the world is often provided by and through religious institutions? Do you know that out of the top 10 international humanitarian organizations, and we have been hearing about humanitarian crisis, that out of the top 10, 3 of the top are religiously inspired? Do we have any idea that the original forms of governance, the original politicians, are the religious? We think diplomacy, politics, that's the domain of the secular, that is the here and now. I have news for you. We're the newbies on the block. The original social services, the original political edifices have been, and in many cases continue to be, religiously inspired and religiously rooted. And the third aspect that I just want us to think about, we hear plenty of talk, and we try so hard for inclusion, human rights, justice, peace, partnerships. SDG number 17 is all about partnerships. Imagine, we figured we had to say we need to work better in partnership with one another in 2015 because we weren't. And guess what? We still are not. If we ignore the realms of the religious, which provide so much infrastructure, political, ideological, and practical, for 8 out of 10 people who believe, then what kind of partnerships are we forming? So now we've moved over the last 20 years from thinking religion is all bad in our political spaces, religion is all bad, to understanding finally, apparently, that religion is all good. And frankly, neither this nor that is wise, because wisdom entails for us to understand that the realms of religion are far more complex than we understand. Religion is a force for good. Religions and faiths can be a force for bad. In many instances, they are for a force for that which is not so good. The COVID-19 pandemic was an excellent illustration for the failure of partnerships around our world. You don't need me to tell you that, but I can tell you one thing. I was serving global religious organizations at that time. I assumed naively, yeah, great, I'm naive. I assumed naively that these organizations would now seek with urgency to work together. They were serving the same people in the same countries with the same problems. The pandemic wasn't distinguishing between one country and another, between those of one religion or the other. But I discovered to my deep disappointment that the religious NGOs were just as territorial as the secular NGOs doing humanitarian work. Now, I may be even more naive to assume this, but if those of us who do not claim to be working in the name of God or the godly or the faithful, if we make mistakes, okay, we make mistakes. But those of us who are carrying the mantle of the religious, the God, the absolute link to the divine, when we fail to pick up on what we are all ordainedly divine to do, which is to serve one another, that is a catastrophe. And that's where we are at right now, because nobody is holding the religious realms accountable. There's no international law, and even if there was, guess what? We're ignoring it very fine. Thank you.
Vous venez d'évoquer à Zakaram le...
You have just mentioned the religious factor in the world, and we also each religions are facing each other. Mahmoud Kavusoglu, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey, today Member of Parliament in Turkey. We also speak a lot about the face-off between the major powers and the issue of sharing, and sharing of power and sharing of knowledge on the and the analysis around the international order. We can see the limits of this face-off between the major powers, and only between them. You plead for the emergence of balancing powers, counterweights that would allow to open new forms of dialogue, and talk about frank dialogues. What do you mean by frank dialogues? Sincere dialogues.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a privilege for me to attend such an important forum, and I'm particularly happy that more than 1,000 young colleagues are with us. As the initiator of Antalya Diplomacy, where we host more than 500 students and young people, I have to tell you that I'm very much impressed with this forum. And on your question, I have been following the intervention since yesterday. I think we all agree that we are going through a poly-crisis period, which international system has new realities, new actors, and new parameters. And we all admit that existing post-World War II system doesn't meet the expectations of anybody, any of us, but particularly these emerging actors. And what is the expectation of these emerging powers or middle powers, or global south, we can say generally? A fair share of the power and the prosperity. I think this is fair enough. And you know, due to the competition between the great powers, particularly between US and China and Europe and West and Russia, I think divisions have been deepened. And the global south and these emerging powers are gaining momentum. Why? I think the other side of the competitors, Russia and China, I think learned before us how to reach these middle powers. Therefore, we have to understand the strategic preferences and priorities of those middle powers. Indeed, there is a difference between the global South and global West in that end. So what is the vital issue here? I think it's vital that global West starts listening the emerging powers or global South. It is not enough. We need to adopt a fresh perspective. I don't mean only the change of tone. I mean the change of mindset. We have to change this in our relations with other actors, particularly middle actors. Yes, we need a more open and sincere dialogue. To do so, we need to respect our differences. And more importantly, we should refrain from overlooking attitudes and instructing, lecturing style. Unfortunately, it is very common in our societies. I mean, in the West, we enjoy lecturing and instructing the others. And I have to tell you that it no longer works. And therefore, we need to change it. And we shouldn't shy away from the understanding and assessing and addressing the needs and expectations and sensitivities of the others, or the South. And to convince them, we have to act in prudence and justice when it comes to the international events, or we should avoid the double standards when it comes to the various conflicts. Take Gaza and Ukraine as an example. How much are we understanding the sensitivities of Africa? Africa has a great potential with great problems. How much are we helping them to overcome the crisis? How much are we helping them in their fight against terrorism? How many countries are supporting weapons to these terrorist organizations to destabilize those countries in Africa? And the irregular migratory flows and the environmental problems, we need to understand. And the center of economic power is shifting from west to east, the Asia. And we need to go back to Asia with a holistic approach. And we need this for the sustainable economic growth and also supply chains. And these northern corridors are no longer alternatives. Therefore, the biggest trade, more than 50% of the trade in the world is between Asia and Europe. So this east-west middle corridors and other alternatives, only through understanding them and sincere dialogue and cooperation, we can take the benefit of all these changes. Let me stop here.
Depuis hier, on voit bien que revient sans cesse sur la table cette question.
Constantly comes back on the table of the necessity for a more respectful, more fair dialogue between states and between cultures, a better knowledge of the different cultures. Without that, no diplomacy is truly possible. It has so happened, Smelvoud Kavazoglu, that you have been the artisan of the agreement of July 2022 between Russia and Ukraine on the wheat and the cereal exports via the Black Sea. Here is a concrete illustration of what diplomacy can obtain even in a context of war. Can you tell us the background of this agreement?
Thank you very much for reminding this. I'm not here to say that Turkey did the best, but we had to do our best, frankly speaking, and we were all shocked and disappointed with the attack of Russian Federation that we rejected. And as Turkey, we did our best to bring them around the table, and in 20 days, twice. Then first time, foreign ministers, I brought them on the occasion of Antalya Diplomacy Forum I just mentioned. And the aim of that meeting is to reach a temporary ceasefire and to open humanitarian corridor, particularly to or from Mariupol. And 20 days later, we brought them around the table in Istanbul. President Erdogan chaired that meeting and he made the opening statement. And to my mind, they were not very far away from reaching an understanding. And expectations were very clear, neutrality and no membership of any military alliances. and Ukraine's European membership and the status of Donbass and Crimea. If any question is put, I can go into the details. But somehow, 2 weeks after that meeting, even though they admitted that it was the most meaningful meeting between two sides, we were the facilitator, moderator, and it was up to them to decide. And somehow they left the negotiating tables. But we had to continue our efforts, and we needed to bring them around the table on the mutual interest. What was the mutual interest? They had to export their grains, and Russia also had to export their fertilizers. Therefore, after negotiations with both sides, they met in Istanbul, and the agreement was signed. Everybody is focusing on this agreement that three of them signed, I mean, UN, Russia, and Ukraine, to facilitate the export of for the safe export of the Ukrainian grain. But I have to remind everybody that that day, separately, Russia, the then defense minister of Russia, and UN Secretary General Guterres signed another agreement to facilitate the export of the grain and fertilizer of Russia. Some can say that those goods are not sanctioned. Yes, it is true, but they had to export this ammonia through some of the Baltic and Western states and Ukraine, and the grains that are carried by ships needed to get service. They couldn't get any service from any port in the world, no insurance, and no transfer of the payment. Due to our efforts, we were able to extend this deal 3 or 4 times. It took 1 year. And despite the efforts of some of our allies like US and UK, this letter of comfort that they signed, unfortunately, it didn't work. And Russia decided to leave the table or agreement. But meanwhile, of course, there was a sharp decrease of the food prices. I think more than 10%, and it was highest since 2008. So that was important for all of us. And meanwhile, of course, Ukraine seek for alternative ways to export their exports, and the export of grain was desperately important for the Ukrainian economy under occupation. And thanks to good dialogue with both sides, it doesn't mean that we accept this war, we reject, we implemented the Montreux Convention fully. We also brokered the swap of prisoners of war and other prisoners several times. One of them happened recently a month ago. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. So, Nicole Nesotto, you wanted to react? Yes, if I can, yes. Thank you very much. Thank you for revealing the secrets behind this case. And actually, Turkey played a very important part in this. I wanted to add something. Yes, it's good to listen to the countries of the Global South to know what they want. We should listen to them, but it should be reciprocal. It means that the countries in the Global South should not instrumentalize and use the West as the cause of all the problems they're facing. Now, this anti-West feeling works in the Global South and is considered to be the cause of the root of all evils. It's because of decolonization, of exploitation of these countries. Everything's because of the West. But it's kind of double standard. Everything wrong happening in your country is because of the West. It's not true, because you have dictatorships, authoritarian countries in the Global South, and they have the responsibilities of what happened to their populations. But I think the countries in the Global South should listen to their populations and maybe change the way of governance. This is something I wanted to add. Would you like to react? Mr. Çavuşoğlu, would you like to react to this?
I don't mean that all the regimes or systems or the regime or the systems or regional organizations the Global South has been establishing is perfect. But I think instead of singling out the problematic countries, we should try to understand the expectations of the Global South. I just mentioned the double standards. Global South is criticizing us for being in double standard on two wars, Gaza and Ukraine. And the West reacted perfectly against Russia on this war. But how about the Gaza? So we cannot criticize the Global South for this disappointment. It is our mistake to my mind. And secondly, Global South wants to take a role in the international system that was established after World War II. And this system lasted in a very short time to my mind. I was reading the document on the peace, and you were mentioning the system established by the Treaty of Westphalia and the Final Act of Vienna. And those systems established by those treaties lasted 150 years or 100, a century. But the current system is not working, not efficient, not relevant. And the Global South wants to take part, they want to contribute, and we don't let them to join us. This is what I meant. Otherwise, we can criticize us for this, for double standards, including in terms of human rights and the democratic standards, even within European countries. There are differences in the different states of the European countries and having serious problems between them. Thank you.
Merci. Alors, on a parlé du Nord et du Sud.
Okay, so we talked about the North and the South, and now moving on to the Far East, and move on to Japan. Suzuka Nakamura, so you were born in Nagasaki 24 years ago, and you are now a student at University of Tokyo, and you decided to create an NGO called No Nukes Tokyo. You are actually advocating for the complete ban of the atomic bombs and atomic weapons. Could you tell us more about this? Thank you.
Merci for having me here today. I'm Suzuka. I came far away from East Asia, Japan, and I'm working for the nuclear disarmament activism in Japan. And when we think about abolishing whole nuclear weapons in the world, I think the decisions of the policymakers are necessary in the process. So if I want to contribute to nuclear disarmament, maybe being a politician or an expert might be the best choice. However, because I started my first career as an anti-nuclear activist when I was a high school student in my hometown, Nagasaki, where the place atomic bomb was dropped in 1945, I cannot stop myself feeling hope for civil activism or the society. By the way, I think the discussions of international security, including nuclear weapons, carry two difficulties. So first, the discussion itself is very complicated and difficult, maybe you agree. And the second one is the discussion is directly linked to an individual political stance. So I don't know if this second reason is a common story in other countries, but at least in Japan, people very hesitate to show their own opinion because they're not used to it, and it is a stupid story, but in some cases, expressing a political stance too much or joining the activism, it affects them in a bad way, like when they try to find their jobs. So at least I believe in democracy. I think it is very important that this kind of discussions are shared with citizens in proper way. And I also think that a world without nuclear weapons will not happen except for us. We have to spread this spirit as much as we can. So to overcome these difficulties, I decided to launch my own organization because, politicians and experts might be not good at explaining difficult stories because they use very difficult words every time. So maybe I thought I could have a role of that. And so, by the way, in Japan, the main part of the activism are done by Hibakusha, a victim of atomic bomb. They are already 90s and 80s, very old, and they are facing sustainability issues. So, and in addition, their activism is done in a very classic way, which young generation hardly joined there. So, to overcome these difficulties, NGOs Tokyo are doing several activities, and we had a big inspiration from what ICANN did. ICANN is an international NGO who contributed to make a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons in 2017, and which had a Nobel Peace Prize in 2017, which I guess you know very well. And since we are a partner organization with ICANN, we also do lobbying. We research all members of Japanese parliamentarians, whether they agree or disagree with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, through the questionnaire, and we publish the results on the website. To be honest, now only 36% of the Japanese parliamentarians agree with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is very low. Yeah, and through our activities, we expect the parliamentarians to discuss more about this topic and in the Diet, and also provide information for citizens when they vote. So, and we also joined the UN conference for TPNW and NPT, not just to advocate and learn the discussions, but also having opportunities to build networks with people who work for nuclear disarmament, and which is very important for us. So through these activities, I'm definitely feeling some progress and want to make one kind of model cases for the next generation. And I can see many younger participants here today. And I want to tell you that even if you feel that you do not have enough knowledge or experience to work with the issue of peace, I would like to encourage you, because there is no rule or standard or line who can work with peace issues. Like I told you, I'm not an expert or politician, but working on it. And someday, maybe you can make sitting next to these wonderful researchers, diplomat from Turkey and a man from the Nobel Peace Committee. Yeah, so, yeah, that's it.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Suzuka Nakamura. And we can see that in your presentation, that is in the session point, that to ensure the continuity of the courses shared by various generations. And we can pass the torch to the new, younger generations. Many young people in the audience, and we often say that youth is forgotten by the decision makers all around the world. And you see that with Suzuka Nakamura, that the youth is important. They want to do some advocacy. They want to make sure that the voice of the youth is heard. Maybe would you like to react to what was said? Asle Doge, for example, if you want to share something with us. Asle, for example?
Reiterate what Suzuka said. It is so important that young people get involved, and you don't need anybody's to be allowed by anybody in order to participate in peace work. And I would like to commend you also. You started with the Hiroshima and Nagasaki peace messengers, and carrying this forth in Japan is truly important work. As you pointed out, the survivors of the nuclear bombings of 1945 are getting older, and I believe in my heart of hearts that one of the reasons why we have not had another nuclear war since 1945 is because of the work of the Hibakusha and of the global peace movement, creating what academician Nina Tannenwald calls the nuclear taboo. And the nuclear taboo means that it is seen as illegitimate on the highest order to use nuclear weapons. And I think it's very, very good to see that you are keeping on involving the young people. And I think that you are a wonderful example for young people in this room about how you can start something on your own.
Karam.
Adia Karam.
Just very quickly to ditto, absolutely, and I think what is also particularly valuable, and we shouldn't take it for granted, is that this is a young woman who is taking a leadership role in her own society. I am curious as to why there's only 30+% of Japanese, so it would be very helpful to understand that, given that you would think the opposite. And just to say, I think, Your Excellency, you made excellent points about the Global South. I kind of wonder where Japan fits in the Global South, Global North equation, given the kinds of resources that they have. But I also wanted to say it's not so much whether we can help Africa, but it's how Africa can help the rest of the world. Thank you.
Mevlut Cavusoglu, vous vouliez aussi réagir.
Mevlut Cavusoglu, you wanted to react.
We have been discussing what can we do better for the international system and for our future, but I think we need the enthusiasm, ideals, energy, and more importantly, the vision of the youth. So I would like to ask kindly our friends and the youth here not to shy away from taking the lead as Suzuka is doing. So this is, we need you. We need you for better future and better international system.
Alors, avant de conclure notre...
So before we conclude this roundtable with Sandeep Vaslikar, in order to summarize what has been said, Nicole Knisoto. Yes, I wanted maybe to say a few words before the summary, because I think it's amazing. We all love each other. We all in favor of peace. We want to ban nuclear weapons. We want to act as brothers and sisters among the nations and to ban nuclear weapons. But this is not the real world. And I agree. And I think it's important to consider the complete ban on nuclear weapons, but everyone should do it at the same time. But it's only to ask the Western democracies, because of their values, of their ethics, of the historic responsibilities, should ban their nuclear weapons. To be an example, I'm firmly against this idea.
Alors, ce que vous venez de dire...
Okay, what you just said, Nicole, obviously is in line with what we're going to discuss right now. And let me look at Sandeep Vaslikar, because it's a very special moment, because it's a conclusion of our plenary session. Sandeep Vaslikar, your loyal friend of this meeting, because you came the very first time in 2019 with intellectuals, with philosophers, and Peace Prize winners, and you signed the roadmap of our forum, the Peace Manifesto, and identified the most important stakes for the future and for the youth and the future generations. And you published a book recently called Between War and Peace, and we had a plenary session to discuss your book last year. So, as Xavier Ducrest said, we have to move away from the inventory and move on to the next phase, the phase to act, the moment to act. And it's not, the World Peace Forum is not only a forum, it's also an approach, a way of thinking. So in the diversity of our backgrounds, of our experience, we wonder how we can regain control on this planet. What can we do, Sandeep Vaslikar? What's this brand new step for this Normandy pour la Paix forum?
First of all, I want to congratulate Region Normandy. For the last several years, Region Normandy has been promoting peace and dialogue at a time when big powers are promoting wars and death. So congratulations, Region Normandy, vive la Region Normandy. And I hope you continue this year and year. Since Normandy Manifesto for World Peace was issued in 2019, signed by a few Nobel laureates and social thinkers, a lot has happened. And there have been number of discussions on how to translate this manifesto into a concrete plan of action. We have a lot of ideals, we have a lot of treaties, we have a lot of hope, but what we need is a concrete action plan, like what Suzuka is doing, what Mevlut is doing at the government level, what Aza is doing with the faith communities. So we need an action plan which the politicians, the governments, the scholars like Asle, activists like Suzuka, all of you and all the young people here can pursue. So after many discussions over the last 5 years, now we have an action plan which we can propose to our leaders. So it's a 5-point action plan.
Oui, justement, effectivement. Et ce que vous proposez...
Yes, so what you suggested with this roadmap is the action plan is to have a complete Normandy process, a Normandy manifesto, to have tangible objects, targets, and we have 5 main priorities. Can you describe this, talk about these 5 main priorities? Thank you.
So what we started was Normandy Manifesto. What I present today is a Normandy framework for action. And I want to make it clear that while this action plan has come from lots of discussions around the world, it's not my action plan, it's not your action plan, it's an action plan of everybody, especially of the younger generation. Okay, so the 5 points. Number 1, there should be a time-bound process for phased elimination of nuclear weapons. A time-bound process. There should be a clear timetable for eliminating all nuclear weapons phase by phase. The first 2 phases of this elimination plan should be no first use, and secondly, an agreement between 5 permanent members of Security Council to avoid a nuclear war due to interface between artificial intelligence and nuclear weapons. And I'm happy to announce that this process has already started as a result of our manifesto. And for the last 2 years, even while Russia and United States are at war in Ukraine, the Russians and Americans and the Chinese and the British and the French experts are meeting in Geneva from time to time to find a solution to this. And we will have the next roundtable in December in Geneva, and I see a number of French experts there who will be joining this. Point number 2, there should be a global convention to prohibit the misuse of artificial intelligence and other technologies for weapons of mass destruction, like nuclear weapons, biological weapons, chemical weapons. Action number 3, there should be a conclusion of an international agreement to reduce the military expenditure step by step, including the military expenditure of the big powers, and divert that money to face the common challenges of humanity like climate change and health and others. Point number 4, there should be a robust mechanism for resolution of conflicts and prevention of conflicts in the United Nations to create a real collective security of all nations, not few nations, not selected nations. And point number 5, before I come to point number 5, I just want to clarify in response to what Nicole had said earlier. All these points are proposed on the basis of a universal, multilateral, coordinated, and equal agreement. I'm not proposing unilateral disarmament by any one country or unilateral reduction of arms expenditure by any one country. This is the direction in which the world has to go on an equal basis, on the basis of partnership and on the basis of multilateral action. And so this, if we do this, we go to the point number 5, and that is we should have a global social contract. Jean-Luc earlier referred to, in the previous session, to a social contract in Africa, but the time has come to go beyond Rousseau's social contract. Rousseau created social contract in 1762 when France was under Ancien regime. Now the time has come to move from social contract to a global social contract. So you said at the beginning of this morning that the President of the Republic has made a call for a new international economic order. Now the message should go from all the young people here that the new international economic order is this 5-point plan concluding with a global social contract. Do you all agree?
Yes. Le plan d'action international.
The International Action Plan, Normandy pour la paix. Move from the ideas and move to action. Please take out your smartphone because you have a QR code. Please stand up. Second time this morning. So before they sign this action plan, Normandy pour la paix, so it's a collaborative piece, and you will be the first one to sign this action plan by scanning this QR code, and you will be directed towards this international action plan, Normandy pour la paix. So you will get access to the whole text of this action plan. And of course, you'll have to become the ambassadors, the advocates of this action plan. It's a brand new step. We'll not only talk, we'll act, we'll have an influence on the future of the world. That's it. That's the beginning of a brand new process. It works. It works on my smartphone. Yes, it does. You can sign this action plan. And to conclude this plenary session, I would like to thank all the sponsors, all the companies represented here, and they contribute to this forum: Isigny Sainte-Mère, the SNCF, La Poste, EDF, Orange, and EDF, and Urban Connect, and Arkema. Thanks to all our sponsors, thanks to all our partners. Also, thank you to all the high schools, the Ministry of Education, and all the organizations. Let's have a group photo. And the forum is far from being over. We'll have afternoon sessions, debates, and many, many activities in the village. The forum is far from over. You'll stay here until the end of the afternoon, and we'll keep on reviewing the current state of the world. A big thank you to everyone. Thank you for your enthusiasm, for the hope you brought, and for your involvement. Thank you, and have a nice day.
So, did you arrive yesterday?